This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Diane Hinds.
Hi.
How you
How you
doing?
doing?
Well, yeah. Welcome to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. I've been really looking forward to this. It's 10 o'clock at night here in London. I've had a long day and I was determined I wasn't going to be late for this.
Well, that's great. We love talking to people from around the world, and it's great that we're talking to you with all this technology to you in the UK. We're in
Fabulous.
the great state of New Hampshire, and we love being able to talk internationally with people through this new technology we have in podcasting. And today we're going to talk to you about Trinidad's untold past, colonialism, conflict, and change.
Yep.
And then we're also going to, speak to your story as an author and entertainment publicist, and we'll just get to everything that we can talk to in the next hour. But before we get to that, we always ask a guest on the show a couple of things.
Sure.
What motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
Crikey. So it depends on what aspect you're asking about what motivates me. As we're focusing on the book, I will say what motivates me. Well, I never thought that I could write. My friend, who was a literary agent, she and I shared a client, and my friend, Meg, the literary agent, somehow seemed to think that I could write. And at the time, I said, look, I'm looking after an international and New York Times bestselling writer, Anne Perry. No chance. However, I had an idea for something, and I emailed it to her, and she said, tell me more. So what motivated me about it was something that I'd never done before. I've always looked after other people. As you said, I'm an entertainment publicist. So I was very happy in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got into the writing zone and thinking about storytelling, getting into my characters, I'm thinking, wow, this is a whole new world I've not experienced before, and I'm getting into it. Very different discipline. It coincided with me doing my master's degree. But my goodness, it was something that consumed me in a way that was enjoyable and torturous all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, the creative process is like you have to have a permission structure. Being an artist myself, is like there's a point where you decide, I have something to say. I have something to say as an artist, and you have to give yourself the permission structure to say, well, I'm not Shakespeare. I'm not Miles Davis. I'm not this person, but I have something to say, right? And you have to give yourself that grace where you feel that you actually can break through. Because sometimes you stop yourself from even doing it because you just don't think you're good enough.
Absolutely right. And I never thought I was good enough. And when I submitted my first book to literary agent Meg, she said, look, I think you've got 2 books here. You need to split it into 2. And then I decided that I wanted to make my protagonist's character the start, which gave me the idea of setting the book in 1770, which was the start of an interesting period in the lifespan of Trinidad. It was then the Spanish Antilles. But do you know what I realized is that I did have a lot to say, because it's something about which I never engaged with, the subject matter, the slave trade, etc. And I thought, I have something to say. I have something I want to say. The book is about identity. It's at the time when the Brits conquer what was then the Spanish Antilles, and it becomes Trinidad. It's changing its identity. My main protagonist is born of a plantation owner. She's mixed race. She's finding out about her own identity, So there is a lot to say within that. There were a couple of experiences along the way that I was on the receiving end of that also gave me an opportunity to examine situations that would have happened in the past that still happen today.
Yeah, you can actually tell a story in the past that has a significance and
Relevance resonates. Absolutely. And never in my wildest dreams would I have said that I could write.
That's a thing to get through. That's hard.
Yeah. And there were days that I cried and cried and cried and thinking, I can't do this. Whatever made me think that I could do it. But now I'm writing book 3.
Oh, it's like a trilogy. Was it a trilogy from the start?
No, it wasn't. Book 2, which was book 1, is set in the sort of 1980s. And in the 1980s, I worked at the Trinidad and Tobago High Commission. So it kind of inspired a story about a diplomat's daughter getting kidnapped. And I just thought, well, now that I'm just turned 60, 61, I've got life experiences that I can share, that I can put into a story. One of the things that Agent Meg, she signed a former spy. And I remember sitting down with her and the young lady, the ex-spy, telling her that you can write a lot of truth through fiction.
Yeah.
When those light bulb moments go on?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Hearing that was validation.
That's why I always liked, going to the 70s, I like Gene Roddenberry and Rod Serling, who both were science fiction authors, right, writers, but they would talk about racism, and they would talk about those things through their science fiction.
Absolutely. Star Trek as well.
You're known for doing that. Known for like showing like a racist kind of behavior of people toward like Vulcans.
Absolutely.
Or people who were different alien races, and then using that as a subtext, so it wasn't direct. And Rod Serling at the monsters on Maple Street, and people were like looking at the other as an enemy. And science fiction has a habit of being able to do that because it can put a layer on it. It could so it's not a direct.
Correct. It's not offensive. It's not in your face.
Yeah.
But it makes you think.
Makes you think. And then if you actually take something that's like, oh, this is like a fiction, then you can sneak like things in. You can put subtext in. You can make people relate to something maybe they didn't think they were going to relate to.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And Anne Perry was another person that made me think a lot about sort of attitudes. She had this wonderful expression that I still use now: wait until you learn that one thing more. And that's so true.
Yeah. I just think the creative process is such a great way to kind of take what's inside and what's outside, and then your own experiences as an artist, and kind of weave your vision. And that's what becomes like uniquely like important, because like how you see something or how you turn a phrase.
Yeah.
It's like you could have read a lot of things. You could have read Hemingway, you probably did. There's stuff in there in your subconscious. But like once it goes through that filter,
yeah,
and you're not using AI, it's actually you that's writing it, and that's what I love, is like the human aspect. I'm in technology, but they got a lot. What's tricky about technology is they got people using these new AI tools, and you're like, well, how much is really you anymore, and how much is the machine? And like, is that really going to destroy creativity and real human conversation? Because it really needs to come from, like, I use it as a tool.
Yeah, me too.
I don't like it when people use like, "Why? You want the whole thing? You want the whole thing? You used it for the whole song. You didn't use it as a tool. You used it as a That to me is like you start to wonder, like, okay, are we going to get lazy here, or are we not using like what is uniquely us?
I don't think it will end creativity. As humans, I think we have the capacity for creativity, but AI just enhances what we have. It's like a calculator.
Yeah. It's a calculator, but yeah, it's like you still have to have somebody running, steering the ship. The self-steering. It's like automatic. Your cruise control. It doesn't work all the time.
So where do you get your creativity, your ideas from?
Well, I kind of like I just I like to do things in a flow state. right? So I like, I've been a musician since I was 17. And so when I write, I use a lot of this, like I just like multi-track something at my Moog and my
Hmm.
piano, and I'll just kind of riff it. I'm a kind of very much in the modal jazz, stream of consciousness, experimental. I'll just put something down and let it evolve. And I might have some kind of outline or some phrase. I might have like some idea, like a Coltrane Love Supreme. I might have an idea like a chant, like I'll come up with a phrase and then I'll let it work out. And I can actually plan something out. I could actually plan a whole song out. But what I found over time is in that flow state, I actually find things from my subconscious that I didn't realize I was going to find, and I find that journey very satisfying. And then I'll work on it and reframe it. But I start usually from just a clean slate and just go.
So do you find that you're actually creative within the studio environment?
Yeah,
or do you have to go away from it to find the creative aspect?
I can, I've been able to just like, I can just jump on my piano and because I have a bedroom studio, I can just do it. Now, sometimes I might be walking in the woods, or I might be like on a plane with my voice recorder or my little mini synth that I can bring on the plane. Nobody even knows I have it. So this stuff, I can pretty much, whatever serves the song. What I find is I can create like anywhere. And, if I'm in my studio, I'll tend to recreate. But if I'm out in the woods, I might come up with something, voice memo it, or remember it and come back and put it down. Write something on a piece of paper or put it, writing music, music tends to come from like wherever you are. But if you have a piano and you make it so you can get to it, so you don't have to travel to a studio, then you tend to play it. That's what I find. Like some artists, make sure that their stuff is like their full studio is not with them, or it is with them. You kind of see different points of view, whether or not you have that home studio, or whether or not you really don't work until you go to some outside studio. So it was different perspectives.
I find that I get my creative ideas for work or for writing when I'm in the car driving.
Yeah, that can happen. I mean,
my head's cleared, and then because it's cleared, ideas start coming to me. I find that rather weird because I can't write anything down. I can't do voice notes.
Oh, so you just like try to remember what the idea was from the driving and then come back and put it down. I've heard a lot of artists talk about that. I've talked to film directors, painters, and people say like when they're out driving or walking or somewhere, things come to them in that kind of phase. Like sometimes you have to, sometimes you have to have like a place to kind of clear your mind, or driving is like you're focused on the driving and this other thing comes in. And you're like, oh, so you weren't thinking about doing it and then it suddenly comes. Yeah. Kind of like a dream. If you recapture a dream, then you say, oh, I had this dream and then I put it down. You have to get that subconscious thing going.
Indeed.
But like the first book called, I'll put
Conquerabia.
it. Yeah, this one. This
Conquerabia. Yeah.
Struggle for Identity. That's the first book in the series.
Well, it's not a series as such. I don't want to call it a series, but I chose that title, Conquerabia, because my research said that it was an early name for what is now Port of Spain.
Oh, so that's the original name.
And I just thought, okay, I didn't know that. My research unearthed that. I want to bring it back to life. I want people to come across the word and ask themselves, what is this word?
That's really what Trinidad was, the original name?
Well, Trinidad, because it was sort of discovered 1498, Christopher Columbus. Even though he was Italian, it was La Trinita. Something like that, La Trinita, the Trinity. So for many years under Spanish, that's how it was known. The capital was San Jose, many, many, many years ago. And then it became Port of Spain. It's a very different location to San Jose, yes. Do you know, I've got to try and recall this because I put the book to bed about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
To try and remember stuff. Anyway, so what I'm pleased with is that, well, let me go back a bit and explain. My parents are from Trinidad. They grew up in St James. They were neighbours of such. And my father, at the age of 10, knew that he wanted to serve God. So when he grew up and he had married my mum, they had my eldest brother David in Trinidad. My father decided that he wanted to come to the UK to train at theological college, which he did. Then he had more kids. And in 1975, November the 15th, we upped sticks and flew to Trinidad. And we were there for 4 years. But I remember the culture shock, the different way of life, the different type of racism, and hearing mum and dad talk about certain aspects of Trinidad's past. And one name I remember from those days was Louisa Calderon. And my mum talking about how this 13-year-old girl was tortured by a method called picketing. Have you heard about this?
No, I have not experienced that.
I'm not experienced. I hope you don't.
No, but I've not heard of that. I mean, I'm familiar with American experience of like lynching and whipping and those things, but I have not come across that.
So this particular method of torture, she was strung up by her hand, I can't remember which one, and her other hand was tied to her opposite ankle. And the other foot was resting on a triangle. So, that would be quite painful. She wasn't charged or anything. She allegedly stole something, but we don't particularly know. But to hear about a 13-year-old girl, because I was 12 at the time, being tortured in that way, just stayed with me, thinking, wow. And then I saw pictures in books about this, drawings of her being picketed, and thinking, this is horrendous. I don't want to focus on all the negative stuff, but it's an interesting aspect of Trinidad's history. I never came across such methods of torture before. It was the first time I encountered torture against another human being, torture against a female, a child, essentially. So I've got all these things going through my head. Learning about the slave trade. One of the things that I also read about was that under Spain, its previous governor, Chacon, Spanish governor, apparently Trinidad treated its slaves a lot better because of the Code Noir. The Code Noir basically said that plantation owners had to basically respect, they couldn't draw blood on their slaves, so they had an element of protection until this new British governor came along and tore up the rule book. So it changed things. But Trinidad didn't have the sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? The uprisings like Jamaica or Haiti in particular.
Haiti, yeah.
Correct. So the more I was researching about Trinidad, I'm thinking Jamaica, Haiti, Barbados, when it comes to literature, when it comes to arts and what have you, America dominates. These islands have had their place in the spotlight. But Trinidad's story is unique. And I want to bring it to life again. So as I was writing about that and researching it, oh boy, I was excited about reviving that particular part of Trinidad's history.
Did you not feel they had been really developed, or people had written about it, or you didn't think they had maybe the focus that you wanted to bring to it?
Do you know what? I didn't think that at the time. I think once I realized that I was writing about this, I did some research and found that there were books that touched on the subject, but I'd never come across before. Now, I don't want to sound negative about that, but I was born and brought up here in the UK. So in secondary school, I think you might call it middle school, I could be wrong, we were learning about the British kings and queens of history.
Mm-hmm.
Very little about the slave trade.
Yeah.
When I went to Trinidad, I was learning about the Caribs and Arawaks, the first people that colonized the islands. And then I was learning about the slave trade. And I had a history class, and I had this female history teacher. This was a shock to me. And one day in class, we were learning about the slave trade. She said, "You, Diane, you would be working in the house. You'd be privileged because you're light-skinned. You would be working as a domestic in the house." Oh my God, that was a wake-up moment. But it engaged me. Like, okay, why? So I'm learning about the racism. I'm learning about privilege, both at the same time.
So I was like, and when you were in the UK, they hadn't really gone any the depth into that, right? You're saying they didn't really focus on it.
No, until recent years. But I'm old enough now that, school, I did that years ago.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's some parallels, like in the U.S. history, like it's minimized, the slave trade. They kind of talk about it when they talk about the Civil War, but they don't really go into depth. I had to learn it when I went to college. When I went to college, I had to really dive into what was really going on and read about, what was going on in the 60s with the Panthers and the SNCC and Malcolm X and Langston Hughes. It's like I started it's like because they weren't really giving me that. I had to go find it.
Yes.
Because they didn't really want you to find it. So it's interesting that you actually were when you went there, that they actually was there, in the classroom curriculum that you, and so that must have been really eye-opening.
It certainly was. It really was. And, I'm not particularly academic. I never really was. And I was ill at the time, soon after this incident with my history teacher. But when I was off school, I was reading my history books and learning about the Caribs and the Arawaks and differences between them, and the development of the island at the time, because I couldn't get enough. Mm-hmm. And when I'm ill, I don't know whether I've got exactly. Yeah. The last thing I want to do is pick up a book, but this was engaging me in a way that I've never been engaged by academia before at school.
Yeah, because it kind of gives you your history, learning the history of a culture or understanding your place of different types of people in history. And like sometimes, some people, like I remember my father, sometimes there was like a shame in it. He didn't want to really dive into it.
Correct. Didn't want to talk about it.
Don't want to talk about it. And it's like, in my history, in our family, is like we had Blackfoot and Cherokee Indian. And we had a great grandmother that was like a full-blooded Blackfoot. And my father would my uncle was very interested in it because sometimes she actually would like make teepees and talk in Blackfoot language, indigenous language. And my father was embarrassed by it, but I was enthralled by it. My uncle, his brother, was more in tune with it and thought it was important. My father thought, I was like, oh, he was kind of looking at, that his Indian heritage as something to run away from and to be ashamed of, along with the African American part, the slave part. Other people in our family were trying to figure out who were our slave owners. They wanted to know the line. They wanted to find out, like, where did our name come from?
Yes.
We had certain people in the family wanted to know, and people in the family don't want to know. So,
this is very interesting. I want to come back to the Native American aspect. So recently I met Dexter Wansel. Do you know Dexter?
Oh, I think I've heard of him. Yeah.
Fascinating guy, hugely talented musician. I can't even remember. He worked with, I think, the Stylistics and various other artists of that.
Yeah, Stylistics, yeah.
And he was A&R at, I forgot which record label. Anyway, so I met him and I said, look, I was looking at him and trying to figure out his ancestry. I'm fascinated by this. And it's not an offensive thing to do.
No.
I'm just curious. So I said, Dexter, where does the name Wanzel come from? And he said, well, it's German. The plantation owners of his ancestors.
That's their name, right? Yeah, that's the way it is.
Wow.
Like my family name Jones goes back. Jones, go back to a Jones that actually was the slave owner, and we found it. And we were actually found like insurance policies that the slave owner had.
Wow.
Like, and he would named all of his slaves like with his last name, and they were on the policy. You actually could find it. But that's the thing, is that there's a big document trail, because these like companies, like these big insurance companies that were around in the 1860s and 70s, they still have the documents. And if you go look for them,
That will be fascinating to research.
You can find them.
Yeah.
But a lot of African Americans, we figured out that we could find it that way. But I don't know how it is in the Caribbean. And if they're, I would think they would be the same type of thing. They probably had like UK insurance companies that were involved.
It was, yes.
Like Dutch insurance companies that were involved or whatever.
A couple of years ago, my son and I went to the Bank of England, and they have a museum there. And they had a very small section on some of their members and employees having plantations in the Caribbean. They acknowledged it, and they had to acknowledge it. Somebody highlighted a book to me recently that they're reading. They commented on mine, and they were reading a book called Britain's Black Debt. And I don't know how much you know about this, but and again, I can't recall dates, but when the abolition of slavery occurred in the 1830s and what have you, plantation owners were paid a certain sum of money per slaves they owned. You know about this?
So there's a record? Is there a record of that?
There is a record. And allegedly that debt for the money to pay the plantation owners was cleared as recently as something like 2014.
Yeah, the records will get you. They like because you like your banks, you like your insurance companies, you like that paper trail, but the paper trail can burn you both ways.
But this is so fascinating that unless you're interested in it, you really don't know much about it. And again, this is not to be offensive or in your face about it. This is not a grievance that I have.
No.
I am fascinated about
history.
Ancestral.
Well, it's history and the ancestry, and people want to know. They want to. I find that it's like, why wouldn't you want to know what your line is? Why wouldn't you want to understand?
Correct.
What your ancestors had to go through? Why would you just kind of like, oh, I don't want to, because maybe it's not a happy story. So people say, like, well, if it's not a happy story, but you learn from it. Doesn't have to always be the happy day that actually informs you or makes you or makes your family who they are. But my opinion as an artist is like, it's when you go through something, and it's not always the positive, that creates the artistic event. That actually creates the drive. So you have to have that looking glass self, and you look at it, and it might be hard. But when you look at things, sometimes the stuff that's in the dark place or in the sad place is worth looking at. You got to get through it, but like it's worth, to me, is the exercise of exploring it, is how you create. It's cathartic to me.
And me, absolutely.
And some people do, maybe they want to just put blocks on things. But
my son, have you ever done a DNA test?
Yeah, we did some, and we found out it goes back pretty. We found some things go back to West Africa, and a lot of information we found. My grandfather, my uncle had done a lot of work to actually figure out things on to where we came from. So
my son did his about 5 years ago, if that, and it showed that he had something like 31% Irish. I'm mixed with French, Spanish, Irish, Portuguese, and Dutch, according to my mother. Mm-hmm. So my son's DNA test said that he had about 31% Irish, 32% Benin. I never knew that.
Yeah, because you find we found the Cherokee, we found Blackfoot, we found German, we found some
What's Blackfoot?
Blackfoot Indian, and it's a Native American tribe. There's a Blackfoot Indian tribe. Everybody knows Cherokee, but Blackfoot's not is more rare. More people might not know it, but there was a tribe. They had they were in New England, in the eastern northeastern part of the U.S. But yeah, it's just like finding the history. There's a lot of different versions of it. Like we're in this area now as the Pennacook Indian. Actually, a county I'm in is named after a tribe called the Pennacook. And then you can find all kinds of names that actually go back to like Indian names, like we get like Long Meadow or Chicopee.
Yeah.
There's all these like a lot of the names of the towns and places are all indigenous, tribal names.
I was in Las Vegas, and I love going traveling when I'm out there. And I went up to Beatty, I think that's pronounced it. There's a ghost town there. And I went to the museum in Beatty. And the, what do you call them? You have a different word for it. But the curator there was half Native American Indian. And I got chatting with her about her heritage. And she kind of wanted to not focus, she wanted to stamp it down. And I thought, no, I want to know more. I bought books on Native American history because, that will also inform my knowledge of Trinidad because it ran about the same time.
Yeah.
As I was at this particular museum, I saw that they had an old turtle shell that was sewn as a water bag. So the shell would have become softened so that they could sew it up and use it to transport water. Oh my God. Just learning about that alone was just like, wow.
There's so many things that you can learn. There's all these like holy sites and scrolls on the rocks and different like mystical areas or places where they would do their chanting and their dances, the rain dances and fire dances and spirit animals. And you see spirit animals on these artifacts, and you find all these arrowheads all over the place. You find these indigenous artifacts all over New England. If you look for them, and if you find the museums that have them in it, then you can travel and dive into it. But this, some people just don't give it the respect because the understanding like in the indigenous and then slave and colonial periods, and people understands like there's indigenous peoples in multiple places in the world. They got wiped out through colonialism along with the slave trade, and that history might not be something that's that makes people upset or makes them uncomfortable when you talk about it, because it's like if you want to say, well, you want to talk about World War II and the Great Generation, you want to tell aspirational stories. When you tell a story about Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where an entire indigenous tribe was just wiped out by settlers. Nobody wants to hear that story.
No.
They want to hear about Plymouth Rock. They don't want to hear the story of a whole like tribal like society just wiped out, purposely wiped out, and actually document this show. They wiped them out, and so you're like, okay. I can understand why maybe you don't want to feel the guilt and shame of that, but
it happened. We can't ignore it.
Yeah, is that people don't want to tell the story because you think you can run from the story, but the story's still there.
What I have some wonderful memories of being in Trinidad was the contribution that the colonial era brought to the island was, the beautiful houses and buildings, the beautifully kept grounds. That was an era of, colonialism, because obviously the money was there to build these fantastic buildings and to maintain it. both our countries are struggling for money and having to make cuts. The money isn't there anymore. It's a shame, but we did have access to a lot of things. We got the schools and the education and so forth that, perhaps would not have happened as quickly had it not been for the awful aspect of the slave trade and the money that it made around the world.
Well, it's like the empire. Like when you have an empire and you have the satellites, then you benefit from that, funding of the satellite colonies, right? You get the structure, which means you'd have the buildings, you'd have the edifice of the government, the tax money being used, being funneled, the investments being made. So you have that structure being set up, and it's the artifice of it, and people will point to that and then not point to the other pieces of it. So here's the artifice, but what happened to the people? What's the story behind what happened to the people that actually built it? Like in America, like DC was built by the slaves. The White House was built by the slaves.
Absolutely, yeah.
The plantations, a lot of them were built by the slaves. And you'll go to these plantations and they'll have weddings at them, and I'm like, I don't know if I really would have my wedding at a plantation. But it's like, oh, it's beautiful, but like, well, how was that built? Like, so yeah, it's like you have to have like maybe some awareness of history, or you don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because we were talking about Native American culture and its almost diminishing aspects of it. But here in the UK, they invest a lot in maintaining the Welsh language, the Scottish language, which is a good thing because we shouldn't lose that.
Yeah, you don't want to lose that history.
No, but when the BLM protests happened and they pulled down Colston's statue in Bristol, he profited from the slave trade. He built the Colston Hall that gave us a theatre and music venue. I don't know how I feel about that pulling down of the statues. I haven't, I haven't made peace with myself either way with that. But I think we should retain them as a
marker,
as a marker, as a symbol of what happened.
Yeah, I think getting rid of any history, because Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, you need to remember, right? And if you had in the U.S., we've got these generals, that were working for the Confederacy. Right. And so we've got all these things named after these Confederate generals, right? All these things named after Confederate, soldiers, Confederate president. Well, that's the history that happened, and so to me, it's like, well, history is history. Let's tell all sides of it because it's what it is, And so people in Germany, they kind of learn the lessons of what happened with the Nazis. They teach it so they don't forget it. So they remember what the consequences are. It's actually part of the culture.
People are still trying to bring that aspect back, aren't they, in Germany?
But there's some people who try to bring it back, and they're kind of like it's dictated by law that the Nazi Party shouldn't ever come back, but now people are trying to bring it back.
Yeah.
So you got to remember the history, because if you erase history, even the bad parts, then people will start to romanticize all aspects and forget about the consequences, because we have people making, 1940s level mistakes in terms of oligarchs and dictatorships and leaning into authoritarianism. Because, did you not remember what Mussolini did? You did not remember what Stalin did? You remember what the Empire of Japan did? It's like you have to understand your past, or you repeat it. So, going back and learning about it, and this is not cherry picking things that you like. Sometimes you have to look at everything.
I was thinking that during COVID, during the BLM movement, that these events tend to create great art across the board. And I'm looking forward, poor choice of words, I'm interested to see 10 years from now what has generated as a result of this, how people have used music, for example, to express themselves. We have an artist here in the UK called Banksy. I don't know whether you've heard of him.
Yeah, yeah. My daughter she's 25.
He's into him. Oh my God, that work is phenomenal.
Well, I think the times always generate the art.
But major events in particular do, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because it does impact people's lives more greatly.
Well, you want to you looked at your times, and like there's some people it's like, oh, you just want to write the happy song, right, or do the happy artwork. But a lot of times, like, you look at what's happening in the world, and you're affected by, certain pivotal events, and some of those events are always in the happy, a place. Sometimes they're in a more of a tragic place, or they're in a consequential place. Something that consequential has an effect, it has a meaning, and artists tend to take that. Whatever type of artists, painters, actors, writers, musicians, any type of artist will look at something and try to understand it, process it. And I think that's what's important is for those artistic hands or mindsets to filter these events,
Yeah.
and have these interpretations. And the interpretation is going to be uniquely from that artist's perspective, but some things are universal, and so you see something and you can pick up on the frequency of it and say, hey, that's something that resonates.
So what angst has inspired you to write your next song?
I'm very frustrated with like this idea that that we need a dictator. There's some Americans that feel it's okay to have a dictator because they feel that they've lost their way or they're resentful, and these type of the mindset where you rather have a strong man instead of your free will.
That term,
Instead of your free will, it's like there's this tendency where the people like you're becoming a willing sheep to follow a strong man, and like you're going to get the scraps from the strong man, or you're going to have free will and do your own thing. And so I've been working on some ideas for some like I don't know, I could write rock operas or write like long like pieces, and I've been playing with those kind of ideas.
Brilliant! I'd love to hear the rock opera.
Yeah, I've been working on ideas, so it's probably won't be out to the end of the year, but I'm working on some concepts in that mindset. But it's just I think you should look at what's going on and reflect it. Like Dylan. Dylan was a big reflection. Even Hendrix. If you think about when he was talking about like the riots and the fires on Electric Ladyland, the house burning down, is a song about like watts going up.
Yeah.
In flames. It's like Hendrix is this like psychedelic like god for rock, but he in Electric Ladyland and some of his music, he had political speech in his music based on what was going on. It wasn't heavily focused on, but I mean, Machine Gun. What is that? Machine Guns talking about the Vietnam War, people getting gunned down by machine guns. Some people don't want to talk about that. They rather talk about other songs, what he wrote. Yeah, I understand. The Purple Haze, yeah, that's where your head's at. Machine Guns, like where my head's in, house burning down. It's my head. I like the fact that he could go there.
So yes, 10 years from now, it'd be interesting to see what art has been generated from these times.
Yeah, I think it's like conflict and change, generate a lot of things to like a lot of material that people are seeing, like, oh, how fast you can turn around. How fast you can go from being a beacon to being with the axis of evil. So you never know. It's like things can change, and people would sit there and like, oh, how did that happen in Germany? How did that happen in Poland? How did that happen in Italy? In America right now, we're seeing things that look a lot like what happened in the 30s, and people are just sitting there saying, "Well, that can't happen." Well, it looks like it's happening.
So, how do you actually feel right now? Because you're there in the midst of it. I'm an observer looking in,
Mm.
from miles away.
I think there are some people who just were looking for scapegoats. There were people that were looking, saying it's the other. That it's the BLM, it's DEI, it's gay rights, it's these things that were taken away from them. But what they didn't seem to understand is we're in a very uneven economy. We've got the wealth at a level that we haven't seen since the 1920s. And when you had this wealth deficit at that level in the 20s, you had a crash.
Yeah.
And people aren't learning from history, because when you just have oligarchs with all the money and the middle classes and the blue collar don't have the money, and then you start playing nationalistic mindset games, and worldwide there's these right-wing nationalistic mindsets. It seems to be marching toward a 1930s problem, and if we don't get a hold of it by understanding it, and people are spending all their time on social media watching cat videos instead of looking at what is going on right in front of them, then you kind of slow walk it into some kind of into a crisis. So we're running into a constitutional crisis right now, where government's not following what judges told them to do. Judges are making orders, and the executive is ignoring the judiciary. We're supposed to have 3 branches. The executive is not all powerful, but our executive somehow thinks they are, and so now that's a big problem.
I'd like to relate this, if I may, to the time that Trinidad became British, because Britain installed its first British governor, Thomas Picton, who was lawless, and who picketed, tortured Louisa Calderon. That was 1700s, late 1700s, and stuff happens. I was going to say a rude word, but stuff still happens.
Yeah, well, that's very historically, significant, because if you have this kind of line toward authoritarianism or oligarchy, or it's like tied to a monarchy, well, then people are going to have this kind of top-down approach, and you're not going to really have like democratic principles of the people can decide. No, the people don't decide. These like landed nobles that can tie back to the king, or tie back to the monarchy, or tie back to the structure. That's what rules. And it seems like people are gravitating toward, hey, I kind of like a king to tell me what to do, because I don't know what to do. So I'd rather have the king plan my life out than me plan it out, because it's too hard for me to plan it out, because I'm risk averse. I'm too scared to take ownership. So I'd rather just be, doing what the king wants. So it seems
it's
like
easy. Some people opt for the easy life as well.
But it's not so easy, though, because sometimes you're just going to get the scraps.
They learn the hard way.
Yeah,
some people are.
You think it's like, are you going to get to be the billionaire? Is it Horatio Alger myth? It's like, are you actually going to get that opportunity? Like, you get people thinking they're going to win the lottery and they're going to be Bill Gates. Like how many times do you actually get to be that, right? Wouldn't it be more likely, like, if you could actually get an education, if you could actually have healthcare to stay in a good position, is like a good, to have your life be useful, because you're not like dying of a disease, the preventable disease.
Yep.
So, people are looking for some quick hit, like they're going to win the lottery, without sustainable individual responsibility and personal growth, right? So, like, if you don't believe that you can, and you're locked out, and you say, well, I'll just accept That what? You're a slave? It's like we get a lot of people like in the blue collar. Is like, are you really, really in control of what you're doing if you're working 3, 4 jobs?
So if you're president for the day, what one thing would you do?
Well, I think we need to have a redistribution of wealth, like what happened in the New Deal. There was a belief that Roosevelt felt that if I gave all those starving farmers and all the starving workers from the Great Depression, and I got them a job working for the WPA, and I get them a Social Security, so the elderly people have some respect and dignity and don't die on the street. That I can build a baseline that Americans like are as a citizen, you have certain rights and certain privileges as a citizen that you're going to get a respectful like elderly life. You're going to have a retirement being taken care of. You're not going to just fall off the cliff. That the government will find the starving farmers and workers jobs to build the aqueduct, to build the highway, to build the dams. Because that's our infrastructure is failing. I mean, a lot of our stuff is like 100 years old.
Yeah.
It still needs to be done. That investment, instead of an investment to the top, is more for the whole country rather than a certain group of people in the country. And I think some Americans will get to this point where they feel like the FDR solution needs to come back, but they have to actually go through it because they didn't understand it. So sometimes you have to go through it because you didn't get it. So you have to get hit with it hard to understand. It's like, oh, that's where we are. So I think we're in this teaching moment where you have to actually experience the bad thing before you can understand that you need the good thing.
Can I ask you a slightly personal question? It's not offensive.
Yeah.
But with all that's going on in America right now, have you thought of leaving?
Oh, yeah. I would love to go back to Japan if I could.
Go back to where? Japan.
Japan. Yeah. Because I lived in Japan for 2 years as an
I remember
expat.
you said, yeah.
And if I could actually, live there again, I did love it. I loved Tokyo. I loved living in Japan. I loved the art that was embedded in the society. I loved the Shintoism. I loved the history that's in the city. I liked the fact that there was a lot of artistic people that I met, and a lot of people that seemed to have some depth that I'm not seeing here. So I don't know. I mean, my experience maybe it's not what everybody experienced, but my family experienced a really great time in Japan. So if I could go there again, I mean, my daughter has mentioned it. They like if she could actually work as an artist from Japan and be an expat there, she would go. And my wife has said the same thing. So if we could, we would. It's right now because we're going through my wife's cancer, we can't do it. But yeah, if there ever was a point to be an expat, sometimes you might have to make a choice. So I would.
Interesting times.
Well, yeah, it just seems like I am just frustrated with the history of colonialism and kind of the negative impacts of what it can be. That now suddenly we've got like countries doing that again. We're saying, oh, we want Canada to be the 51st state, Panama we take over Panama, we take we take Greenland, Russia takes Ukraine, then takes Poland, then takes Romania, then takes Latvia. Like, oh, you want to do the USSR again? And we're saying, oh, okay, we're okay with that because we want to take Canada. So it's like, really? That's where we are? That's what I was saying, like the lessons of the 40s we seem to have lost.
But at the moment, it seems like in certain parts of the world, the checks and balances are holding and restraining.
Yeah, we got to maintain NATO. I mean, we've got to maintain the UN. And when the U.S. doesn't want to be part of it, like, can those things be maintained without us? That's the question. Can the rest of the world do the UN and NATO without the U.S. being a part of it? So it seems like the EU wants to be like taking the leadership, but will they really do it? There's some people in America who are like, well, okay, if you guys can take the reins, that's cool.
Mm.
But I don't know if you guys can. We'll see.
If you could be born and brought up in a different era and time, what would it be?
Well, I'm a child of the 70s, and I was always very enamored with the 60s, and kind of wished that I would had been like a young adult, like 20, 17, in 65 instead of being born in 67. Because I was always like, I was enamored with everything that was going on. And I'm always going back to that time, reading about things that happened, listening to the music, reading the books, reading the poetry. It just seems like it's like, oh, like I was very enamored with it. And I just felt like there was a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of, you read about it, it's a very volatile time. But also
Volatile opportunities, I agree with.
it seemed like there was a lot of opportunity where you said, yeah, JFK saying we're gonna go to the moon. You got, you got Martin Luther King and Malcolm X saying what they were saying. You got, the Black Panthers. You got Student Nonviolent Court Committee. You got the people starting the environmental movement, and you got the gay movement happening. At the tail end, and it's just a lot of people feeling like there's an opportunity to self-actualize and believe in what America is supposed to be about.
Hope.
Yeah, there's this idea that we were going to get better, that we weren't stagnant, that we weren't falling apart, that we were still like building. And now we got into this place where is it rot? It's like it just seems like something is not correct. Like something is like we've got these words on the page in the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, Declaration of Independence, but what does that mean if you don't actually do it?
Yeah.
So I was a political science major, so I read Federalist Papers. I read a lot of the steps that took before the Articles of Confederation, the history behind the Constitution. The ideas of what the amendments mean and how they went about, and reading like all the documents that led up to those documents.
Right.
And you're just like there's this idea that comes out of like the Enlightenment, that you can be better than what we had been in, the authoritarian monarchies, that we can do better than that. And it's kind of sad to see that getting unraveled, to go back to monarchy and oligarchy and authoritarianism. Is like, I thought we were supposed to be on the cutting edge of not doing that.
Wow.
But that's where we're living right now. So I mean, it's like kind of hard to look in the looking glass. Like I was into Victorian poets. Like I love Tennyson, Wordsworth, and William Blake, and the idea of the looking glass self and the self-examination. It's like seems hard for people to do that. For certain people, it's hard.
Indeed, I agree with you there, definitely.
And that's necessary.
So have you been to the UK?
I haven't been to the UK. My wife has been to the UK. But I was never able to do that. The most I ever traveled was when I was in Japan. So she traveled a lot more than I have. I believe she had actually, I believe, been to Trinidad. She's been to West Africa.
Wow.
She's been to England and Canada. She traveled a lot more than I have. So she tells me about it, but I didn't get to do it.
I was only asking because I think you would be, very much at home with some aspects of the literature and so forth. So,
well, it's someplace I want to go. I want to go to London. I mean, I've always wanted to go to Berlin and travel around the EU, just to go to Italy. And I like Lamborghinis and Ferraris, so go to the plant, go look at it being built. Go to Greece and go to Colosseum, and it's like there's a lot of stuff I would like to go check. And one day when I retire, I'm going to take that trip. I can take an EU trip.
Absolutely, you must do it. I mean, Italy. I'm with you there. I love Italy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just the food and the historic nature of it and all the
absolutely.
stuff that you can see is like
I'm going to Italy in May because there is a fantastic Caravaggio exhibition in Rome,
oh
and I'm
wow.
so looking forward to that.
Rome, yeah, I'd love to definitely want to go to Rome. And I'd like to go to like a lot of like places that you would be kind of not typical, but I want to go to places that are off the beaten path to just find out about it, like historical sites that are maybe not the most popular, but something that's different. So
Absolutely. Yep.
I always want to go to some not where everybody else goes. Let me go somewhere
Off
that's
the
somewhere
beaten
else.
path. Off the beaten path.
Yeah, yeah. Jack Kerouac on the road, just go there. So that's the mindset. And we end up talking like in this podcast, and we go off in different directions because
I love that. It's free flowing.
yeah, it's kind of like, but as a creative person, it's really cool to have your perspective, and it's just to me, it's really important to talk to authors. You
It's
know,
important for me as well to talk to other creative people like you because that feeds me. It gives me inspiration as well, you know.
so on your if people go to your URL, is that how they can get in touch with you and find out about all the books that you
It's the
have? And
easiest way that they can find out about me and what I'm doing. So rather than give you loads of social platforms,
that's
the
a
website
central
suffice.
location for everything.
Absolutely, yes.
So are you working on any more books?
Yes, book 2 is being edited at the moment. My lovely editor, Hanley, lives in Chicago, and it's in her hands. Oh my goodness, I'm dreading what she gives me back from that. And I'm in the throes of writing book 3, and I need to knuckle down and write more.
Also,
So, yes.
do you go on book tours? Do you stay within the EU or do you go outside?
Well, do you know what? I self-published this book. Long
Mhm.
story behind it. I won't go into it right now. But I was determined that I wanted to get it out because I feel the story is unique in this era. So I thought the easiest thing I can do is to self-publish it. And because I've got a background in publicity,
Oh
I
yeah.
kind of know what to do.
Yeah, that's a good thing to have. Like then you know what to do.
Absolutely. So, yes, if I had secured a major publisher, that machinery would have generated all those, engagements for me.
Mhm.
I've done talks. I've got talks coming up. I'm not complaining because I'm enjoying the absolute process.
Well, yeah, it's cool to be as an independent musician, which almost all of us are independent. We've kind of got to put that hat on to put our records out because like we want to have our vision put out the way we want it to hit. And a lot of
And
times
you and I
today,
should talk off recording.
yeah, it's always important to get your vision out there the way you want it to be, because otherwise, if people want to put you in a box and sell you the way they want to sell you. So
Yeah.
I'd rather have some control over that, but you have the responsibility, so that's another hat to wear. But I think as independent people out here trying to put out content that we feel should be heard or seen or read, I think that's important, and I love seeing people be out there as independent artists, which I
Ditto.
think is really important for people to go off the beaten path and check out the people coming from different areas, like the underground in music, like authors, independent journalists, independent everything, independent films. That's where I talk to a lot of people in that space.
It's a growing space, particularly with what's happening in America as well with your big companies.
Yeah, big companies kind of
Apple.
like they don't give us all. I think people want to feel that somebody is saying something that's not a cookie cutter or remake of something that's been remade 5 times. I want to see original thought, original ideas, and that usually comes from independent-minded artists because they're willing to tell the story without all the
Constraint.
special effects.
Correct.
Get to the heart of it. But I want to thank you again for being on the show. It's
Well, thank
really
you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
yeah, we love to have people come on. We have authors come on multiple times every time they have a book release. So like, if you want to set that up in the future, we can do that. So let me know, and then we can continue the conversation.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.